This video is about German studies. I would like to explain how I got interested in German studies and what it meant to me over the years. Basically, I got interested in German studies primarily because I learned German as a language, so that was the first step. But it would not be enough on its own. Basically, I only had some basics of the language, and then I didn't do much with that, so that it was something I actually didn't use for the time. And then at some point in my life, I realized that essentially only English is not enough. So that in many respects, culturally, intellectually, maybe even socially, English language, North American experience has its own form, has its own shape, so that to understand it better, one would need to go to a different language. And so that one can choose French language, and one can choose maybe even Spanish language, I would venture, but I chose in a very conscious way German language, so that it was the cultural background with which I was trying to understand the present moment around 10-15 years ago, or even more. So that it was one of those things that essentially has made me to relearn the language and to learn better about the German society. So, and what was the reason for that? What had been the moment at which I realized it was actually changing something for me? I would say first, because of the public sphere. German public sphere is very special in terms of how it deals with its own history, the collective history. And of course, I would include into that 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, so that very painful period in the European history, and the effect they had on the post-war German society, on the post-war German intellectuals, on the post-war German sociologists, let's say cultural studies specialists, post-war philosophers. And I think that was also combining with the crisis, intellectual crisis in general, and maybe intellectual crisis in Germany, which wouldn't have any kind of endpoint. I think that we kind of have that as a picture of the German society in the last century, and maybe even in this century. So that in spite of the German economic miracle after the war, and in spite of the whole thing in terms of the dynamics within Europe, in terms of the economic influence before the war and after the war, and I mean Second World War, of course, and maybe even also applying to the First World War, so that there is that sense of a country and the culture erased from the international cultural map, basically, due to that. And then once you learn the language, once you learn the culture, you have a sense of a community behind it, its issues, its problems, what its media are saying, and I would mean the British media. I would include its TV. It has public TV. It has very good quality output in terms of the press, which goes quite a bit into its history, so that if one thinks about major book fairs, one would of course mention the Frankfurt Book Fair. And there is a sense of a different viewpoint, of course, in terms of the language itself, which is quite different from French, English, and Spanish, and many other languages, including what it went through as a culture in the 1930s and 1940s. So that there is the sense of the collective trauma and the efforts to deal with that. And I think that has a lot of relevance and resonance in the present moment. And it seems that, especially in 2025, with a lot of things in flux. I think that if one goes back to the German intellectual history, one has, of course, major figures in sociology, Max Weber, and one could include into that, of course, Karl Marx as one of the more polemical, more synthetic thinkers, and he gave us the notion of capitalism, by the way. So that, but I would mostly be interested in figures like Georg Simmel, in figures like Walter Benjamin, Siegfried Krakauer, etc. Those who would be doing minor works, essays, fragments, and I think that these are very dense items, and they don't offer any kind of macro theory. There is no macro theory that they would be offering us as readers, as people who try to actually piece together a sense of the present moment based on that. And I think that the German language and the German history and the point of view it offers on the whole of the unfolding of the 20th century and beyond is something of a very useful, well, not a tool, but a point of view, a perspective that actually sets many things into certain place. It adds that extra point of reference that is missing if you only read output in English only, or maybe in French only, or in Spanish only, or in whatever other language only you can be reading or thinking in. And I think that showcasing some of that would be something that could have more of a resonance in the present day as well.